I want to say hello to Ati Shawi, Sister Shawi. I want to say hello to my friend Abiance. I want to say hello to Kiki. I want to say hello to anybody that may be watching. Today is a beautiful fall day, 2022, October 12th. October 12th, 2022. And I wanted to mention something that I forgot to mention in my last video. And that is, I noticed something interesting about Spinoza. I mean, interesting for me, I know, not interesting for most people. But there was a section that I covered so far where he starts talking about bodies in motion. Bodies in motion, bodies at rest. He says, a body at rest tends to stay at rest unless acted upon by another cause. And it'll stay in motion unless acted upon by another cause. And as soon as you read it, you quickly realize that it's a summation of Newton's laws. I mean, because we're so familiar with Newton's laws of motion, right? Well, the thing is that Spinoza, he was born in 1632. He passed away in 1677. He only lived for 44 years. But Newton didn't publish his laws of motion until 9 years later. He published his laws of motion in 1686. So it's obvious that Newton was influenced by the writings of Spinoza. I never knew that before. Now I know. Now you know. A little tidbit of trivia for you. Anyway, I'm hoping to go for a little walk today and get some fresh air. And so I thought I'd just grab my camera and take a video while I'm at it. It's such a beautiful day out today. You can see the trees turning color, the beautiful fall colors. So what are we going to talk about today? I have to think of something that's encouraging to you, something that's helpful to you. I'll try and think. So I think I'm going to try and take this little trail and see how it goes through here, because it might be a little bit quieter here. Might be a little bit better for being able to speak into the camera. That way I don't hear all the cars going by. And so, as I was saying about Spinoza, it's clear that some of his discussion covered topics that were also covered by Sir Isaac Newton. But in any event, most of his discussion was talking about God and how we can prove God's existence through basic premises which he felt were self-evident, and then building upon those premises with logic and fundamental principles which he shared with his reader. And so people today think differently. In those days, they would cover many different subjects, sort of amalgamated into one. Today we have very distinct separations between the subjects of chemistry, physics, mathematics, biology, whereas back in the 1600s there was a lot of overlap, and people may study one topic and then would drift into another topic and so on and so forth. But the fundamentals of Spinoza's work under the title Ethic is dealing with the topic of understanding God and our relationship to God and relationship to our own mind. So far, I'm about halfway through the book, and if I had to categorize it, it would be those two main topics: understanding God and understanding our relationship to God. And then the second major topic would be understanding our own mind and how we relate to ourselves. In this park, they've got a little workout area over there, a bunch of little exercise machines. And this is a band shell that they have, that they often have public gatherings for bands that'll come and play and speakers that'll come and play. And in the summer, every Sunday, they have a concert here in the late afternoon every Sunday. And it's really quite nice. So I'm going to continue along this trail, and I was thinking that today a lot of people say, well, back then maybe they had more faith because God was much more important to them. While their lifespans were shorter, Spinoza only lived to 43 years old. Apparently he died of a lung disease. He spent a lot of his time making lenses. That was his trade. He would grind lenses for the recently discovered scientific areas of microscopes and telescopes. That was all the rage back then in the 1600s. Of course, we're familiar with Galileo and how he used this telescope to discover the planets and things like that. And so Spinoza would grind these lenses, and of course the fine particles of glass would get into your lungs. Not a very good profession to choose, but of course he was dedicated to understanding more and learning more, and that was part of his trade. And apparently, from what we're told in history, that might have led to his demise at an early age of only 43 years old, unfortunately. But some people may say, well, back then people were more spiritual, more religious. Well, the politics and religion were much more intertwined because there was power struggles all the time between the church, quote unquote the church, and the state. Not like today where it seems the organized church, you could say, keeps itself completely separate, at least in Western society, from the state in terms of being involved in any political activity. That's not to say they don't try, and that's not to say there's not an influence. Of course there's an influence there. But as far as official influence, it's not like it was back then when the different churches held significant amounts of political power. You had struggles between the Catholic Church, the Protestant Reformation, and of course other religions were trying to survive as well. Spinoza was born Jewish, and his background was trying to survive and adapt with the surrounding religions. So the synagogue would try and cooperate with the different Christian factions that were in existence at the time around Amsterdam and Holland. And so he had to deal with that struggle. The leaves here are just beautiful, filling up the path. Very beautiful here. So maybe it's easier to to believe in God when you're going for a walk in the forest. I don't know. Yesterday, we went to downtown Toronto, and the level of energy is just crazy, you know. You can feel the energy, people rushing around to make money, and the traffic is crazy. We had tons of traffic while we were down there. It took us almost 4 hours to get back home, when usually it would be only about an hour drive with no traffic. It was just nuts. Everything was blocked. Spadina was blocked. Adelaide was blocked. So just getting out of that downtown core was a bit of a struggle, but we made it, and it was a wonderful day. I spent time with one of my wonderful daughters, and we had just an amazing time chatting and getting along, and we had a really nice lunch. So now I'm out of the park, and I'm going to just continue on. So I was talking about Spinoza and God and all that, and today we have a major influence that has permeated most of academia and you know, some specific disciplines. You take psychology, and apparently over 85% of students of psychology at the postgraduate level would declare themselves atheist, and so that is the the more common set of beliefs in academia today. They were founded as Christian institutions, but most of them now are atheist institutions in terms of the majority, I would say. And so how is that possible? Well, it just seems to be pushed from one professor onto the students, and then they follow in that tradition. And the professors that are most vocal about atheism seem to be the ones that get the most attention and the promotions and what have you, so that's rewarded. And because atheism only deals with the physical, it doesn't deal with the metaphysical, anything related to metaphysical gets pushed away, and that gets separated and left for those institutions of learning like Bible colleges or separate religious institutions for people that want to become priests or what have you, things like that, right? So there are separate schools dealing with theology, but they're obviously kept separate from the mainstream academic institutions, universities and colleges for the most part. And so I think of somebody like Sam Harris, who is an avowed atheist, and yet he tips his hand at certain times. You know, recently he displayed extreme hatred for an individual who's not even an elected official at the moment, but he went on and on about how horrible a person he was. And then, you know, a couple of days later he says, oh, because we realize how short we are on this earth, we should be kind to everybody. So he wants to give the image of being a kind person as much as anybody else, but he doesn't follow his own advice. And that, I mean, I'm nitpicking, but that you can apply that to anybody, right? Everybody has a certain level of hypocrisy that they can accidentally fall into at times. It's a matter of do as I say, not as I do, right? We teach our children, don't be mean to each other, you know, share with one another. But then we can turn around and be mean to our own neighbors and be greedy and so on and so forth. You know what I mean. So anybody can fall into that, but I pick on Sam Harris because he's so visible and because he's made so much efforts to denigrate theism. It gets my attention, I suppose you could say. But even he admits that there was one time when he had a desperate experience. You know the phrase, there's no atheists in foxholes. Well, he had an experience where he was worried he might lose his mind. He took an excessive amount of a particular psychedelic, and he had to call out to God to rescue him from losing his mind. And so, sure enough, he eventually recovered. Luckily for him, he didn't go bonkers. But that's a funny thing, because how can a person be an atheist when they have to reference God so much? And I think Spinoza touched on this a bit when the concept of God is so fundamental to understanding ourselves, to understanding the world in general, that you necessarily have to have a concept of God first to be able to reject that concept. And once you have the concept of God, well, then you're stuck, aren't you? It's like understanding what a tree is. You know that it's got limbs, it's got leaves, so you say, okay, I know what a tree is now. And then you say, well, I don't believe in trees. There are no trees. It's almost that fundamental an effort that you have to make once you understand the idea of creation and the perfection of nature and the characteristics of our own mind. And so that seems to put atheism in a bit of dilemma as far as Spinoza goes. But we'll talk more soon.